January 9th, 1963. Washington, D.C., National Gallery. The most powerful people are dressed in black tie, sipping champagne, pretending to care about art. In the center of the room, a 500-year-old Italian woman, behind bulletproof glass, surrounded by snipers, known to the French as La Joconde. Here is what the official history tells you. This was a marvelous moment of Franco-American friendship, a cultural exchange, a celebration of Western civilization. Here is what actually happened. It was one of the most sophisticated trolling operations of the 20th century. And the Mona Lisa? She had absolutely no idea that she was being used. Let's go off script. To understand why the Mona Lisa crossed the Atlantic, you need to understand one man's obsession, Charles de Gaulle, President of France, resistance hero, a man who believed in every fiber of his being that France was still a great power. But it was 1962, and France was not having a great time. The Americans were openly criticizing de Gaulle's war in Algeria. The US was blocking the France from joining the club, the nuclear club. Kennedy literally called de Gaulle's nuclear ambitions unfriendly. And culturally, Hollywood was everywhere, jazz was everywhere. De Gaulle actually sent a written memo to his Minister of Defense demanding that Anglo-Saxon terms be banned from the army, in writing by hand. So when André Malraux, his Minister of Culture, resistance legend, writer, comes to him with a proposition, de Gaulle listens. Send the Mona Lisa to America. Who had this idea? Not André Malraux, but the famous First Lady, Jackie Kennedy. As an art lover, she knew that this soft diplomacy would be great for Kennedy's presidency. But you're going to ask, what's de Gaulle's secret hope? It is that the Americans might soften their position on the nuclear question. Spoiler alert, that's not going to happen. But before we get to Washington, we need to talk about what happened in December 1962. Because getting the Mona Lisa out of France was already a diplomatic incident in itself. André Malraux walks into the Louvre and casually announces to the curators that he's sending the Mona Lisa to America. Outrage, horror! The conservators are furious. The newspapers lose their mind. Le Figaro, and I quote, "The only other time this painting left France was when a thief stole it in 1911. So congratulations, Malraux, you're worse than a thief." But the decision came from the top. De Gaulle himself. December 14th, the painting is removed from the wall, placed in a custom aluminum case, insubmersible, fireproof, designed to be thrown overboard if the ship sinks. 3 police cars escort it out of Paris. Dozens of officers at the port of Le Havre. And then the Mona Lisa boards the France, one of the most glamorous ships in the world. When you're sending your greatest national treasure, you do it in style. And here's my favorite detail of this entire story. No one on board knows that the Mona Lisa is there. Complete secrecy, until passengers start noticing that a certain corridor in first class is blocked off. And there's unusual military activity. And it's 1962, Cold War, so naturally, people assume the ship is carrying a nuclear device. The captain has no choice. He has to tell the truth. The Mona Lisa is on board. And immediately, the ship transforms. The chefs served Leonardo beef roast and Mona Lisa salad. Passengers throw costume parties in Mona Lisa's honor. She hasn't even arrived yet, and she is more famous than everyone on board. 5 days later, New York Harbor. A flotilla of boats escort her in. Snipers on rooftops, flashing lights. 8-car convoy through 4 states. The Mona Lisa is treated like a head of state, which, as it turns out, is exactly what she was. Because while all this glamour was happening, while Paris was celebrating its cultural generosity and Washington was preparing its most glamorous evening in years, something else was going on. Something that had nothing to do with art and everything to do with nuclear weapons. December 17th. The Mona Lisa is somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. In Nassau, in the Bahamas, Kennedy and British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan are signing a deal, the Nassau Agreement. The US will supply Britain with Polaris nuclear missiles. In exchange, Britain's nuclear independence is over. They'll be dependent on America. Kennedy then turns to France and says, "Join us. Put your nuclear program under America's umbrella." De Gaulle doesn't even bother to respond to the official letters. His position, in his own words: "If France is attacked, the Americans will intervene. But what we don't know is when and how. Therefore, France needs its own bomb." The CIA is not pleased. The internal notes from this period are explicit. They want France's nuclear program shut down. They are actively working against de Gaulle. So picture the scene. The Mona Lisa is crossing the Atlantic as a symbol of Franco-American friendship. And at the same time, the CIA is trying to destroy the French president's most important strategic project. That is the context in which Kennedy stands up to give his diplomatic speech. And what a speech it is! Kennedy understood communication like almost no one before him. He calls France the world's first artistic power, right after mentioning Nassau, where de Gaulle had just refused American nuclear leadership. Then he says, "We will continue to pursue our own independent force and power in the arts." The exact words de Gaulle used constantly about France's nuclear ambitions. Last but not least, at the end, Kennedy refers to the risks involved in transporting the Mona Lisa, which he considered exaggerated, and the danger faced by the GIs during the D-Day to save this work of art. Drop the mic. De Gaulle is watching from Paris, and he was not amused. The French president waited exactly 5 days. Then he hit back. And when de Gaulle hits back, he doesn't miss. January 14th. The Mona Lisa is still on display in Washington, still making headlines. De Gaulle calls a press conference. Then he announces that Britain will not, under any circumstances, be joining the European Economic Community, a direct strike at American foreign policy. Kennedy had spent months pushing for British membership in Europe. It was central to his vision of a transatlantic alliance. De Gaulle just killed it, publicly. The timing was not a coincidence. It never is with de Gaulle. So, 1,700,000 Americans waited in freezing cold to see her, the Mona Lisa. The average time spent looking at the painting, 4 to 10 seconds. Hours of queuing for 10 seconds. But here is the ending nobody talks about. De Gaulle lost. The whole operation was supposed to buy goodwill on the nuclear question. It did not happen. And culturally, instead, America made the Mona Lisa into an American pop culture icon. 2 years later, Andy Warhol would print her face in multiple colors. But the Mona Lisa came back to the Louvre on March 13th, 1963, and she was intact. The painting survived beautifully. But the friendship between France and America, within months, de Gaulle blocks Britain from Europe. He refuses to sign the nuclear test ban treaty and kicks American military bases off French soil. But For one January night in Washington, in the middle of the Cold War, two great nations stood side by side and pretended together that a painting could do what diplomacy couldn't. And just one last thing. Nowadays in Paris, the Mona Lisa receives 20,000 visitors a day. The average time spent looking at her still 4 to 10 seconds. So, some things don't change, do they? This was History of Script. If you want more stories, you know where to find me.